Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox, and thanks for logging on. Everything you see here is for sale. Names, references, and when available, prices in the description below. Reach out to me at tmosso at thewatchbox.com to purchase anything you see here. And if you're looking to sell, we're looking to buy. Supply me. We're buying full collections or one watch, no upper limit on prices paid, and we're paying our best prices of the year as we stock up for the holidays. Again, reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com to buy or sell. Let's jump in with a big piece, literally a big piece, and a rare one. Launched in 1999 and only built through about 2001, this is the Omega Speedmaster Split Seconds, a chronometer-certified Vacheron chronograph. It is gorgeous, and what sets this example apart is its condition. I have never seen an Omega from this era that is so intact. You could see that it looks like it came out not of a time capsule, but from a time machine. The break between the polish of the bevel and the satin of the case is immaculate, razor sharp, everything is intact. The bracelet from this era feels incredibly solid. It feels incredibly straight. Structurally, the integrity is absolute, as though it just came out of the dealer's case in 1999. I have never ever encountered an Omega of this age in this condition. The fact that it is a rare prestige model is the icing on the cake. Now, the watch is 42.25 millimeters in diameter, and a lot of folks mistake this as the X33 case, which it is not. Though similar in size and shape, they are distinct. This is steel, that's titanium, and you can see the through fittings, as well as some of the horns and shear guards for the chronograph, are not consistent with the X33. It uses a Valjoux 7750 that Omega has modified via ETA to accept a chronometer certification and a split-second complication. And you'll note that this lovely silver sunburst dial features a handsome sunburst grain, blue accents, and no date. You'll also appreciate the fact that there's a ray-hot outboard that slopes down from the tachymeter bezel. The blue against the silver gray is absolutely gorgeous. This is a monstrously beautiful watch and extremely rare. Again, we're talking 1999 until about 2001, and it was scarcely sold due to the price when it was new. A chronometer, automatic, a split second, a rarity, an Omega, and perhaps the best preserved millennial-era Omega I have ever encountered. This is a true collector's piece. Let's talk about another collector's piece. Originally launched in 1969, this is the Omega Speedmaster Professional Mark II. Internally, it's a moonwatch with the caliber 861, lateral clutch, cam operation, manual wind. Externally, though designed in the late 60s, this design is redolent of the 70s. Sports tonneau, massive profile, not terribly large. It's only 45 millimeters lug to lug, and it does use conventional lug profiles, so you can put a strap in there, but the look is all of the 70s, with the tonneau sporting that handsome bevel along the flanks, the lapping machine radial satin grain on the tops of the bezel radiating out from the center, an imaginary center point. You can see that the mineral crystal features the tachymeter printed on its underside, so the condition here is excellent, right down to the dial, which features no evidence of errant tools, water, tarnish, marks of age, or uneven patina. You can see everything is very evenly aged from the indices to the hands, and the dial itself is spotless, in outstanding condition. There's a period bracelet that's still in very good condition and suitable for daily use. The clasp likewise. Zoom out a little bit, throw this on the wrist, and you can see that the timepiece sits comfortably and easily. On my wrist, it comes nowhere near the edges, so even if you have a smaller wrist, though this is a big watch at about 42 millimeters across, remember, it's only 45 millimeters from lug to lug, so it's going to be wearable in stainless steel. It's nicely counterweighted by its bracelet, a handsome piece. Not perfect, but a nice daily driver. You can see that, in particular, the character lines are intact. Evidence of having been worn, but it's been spared the refinisher's wheel, as for the most part, the sharp distinctions between the polish and the satin remains quite obvious, clear, and well delineated all the way around. Now let's jump from the early 70s to the late 70s, and what some would describe as a transitional era Rolex Submariner. This is the 16800, launched in 1977. This example has a low 7 million serial number, so it would have been built in the early 1980s. The transitional Rolex watches were built from the late 70s through early 90s, and they're generally regarded as watches that blend the characteristics of the previous vintage 60s and 70s timepieces with some of the running upgrades of the later 1990s Rolex watches. So here, for example, we see the Sub moving into the era of a unidirectional rotating dive bezel, of a 300-meter water-resistant case, of a sapphire crystal, of a high beat movement. All of that characteristic of this era of Submariner, the 16800. I should also mention that the timepiece features a beautifully even patina across dial, hands, and bezel pearl. The timepiece is remarkably intact, though not perfect. As you can see, it is a daily driver, but with substantial metal remaining in the lugs. It looks as though it has simply been worn and sparsely refinished through its history. As you can see, much of the original beveling still intact on the lugs. So while there are scratches and scuffs and evidence of use, there's also a remarkable amount of original Geneva metal present on this case. So this watch is all about the period, the patina, the condition of the dial and the bezel, the fact that all of the metal is there, and because of the sapphire crystal, the high beat movement, the chronometer certification, and its ability to still pass a water test, this is a vintage Rolex that you can wear like a modern one. We're also talking about the era of 40mm cases rather than the later earlier I should say, somewhat smaller Rolex cases like the 1680. This has the full figure of a 5-digit Rolex watch, and it looks just as good on the wrist as any sub ever. The nice thing about Rolex is there's no planned obsolescence of style, and though we're definitely moving into the era of the modern Submariner here, nevertheless the watch manages to have one leg in the era of vintage with the patina, and one leg in the era of modernity with some of the material specifications and durability that come with that kind of nuance. So this is a fantastic watch if you want a vintage Rolex to wear every day. Now let's take a look at something that's far newer. As a result, if you want no-holds-barred durability, you want a modern watch, and that's exactly what you get with this 42mm Breitling Super Ocean Heritage 42 stainless steel 42mm ceramic bezel insert, a lovely applied index dial. It's designed to evoke the original late 1950s Breitling 1004 Super Ocean dive watch, the reference 1004. That's why you have this minimally beveled lug profile, no guard crown, a straight index dial without numerals, straight indices on the bezel without, for example, numerals or a 15-minute sweep, and you have this straight bar junction between the mesh bracelet and the lug. So you can see this one's exceptionally fresh. It uses the Ocean Classic bracelet, which is manufactured for Breitling by Stabe. And you can see that the removable links are exactly like you would have on a standard bracelet. You simply remove them to size, and it has them on both sides, so you're going to find the right fit. It's a comfortable watch. It's not huge, though it's got a lot of presence because of the span of the lug. So you can see on my wrist, 16 centimeters in circumference. It's quite comfortable. It's a timepiece that feels very solid and also nicely counterweighted by the clasp and the bracelet. Inside the case, well, one of the big highlights of this watch is that the B20 movement is actually Tudor power. So we have a Tudor MT5600 series movement. Breitling makes a few changes, notably swapping the silicone hairspring to a more serviceable and repairable ferrous hairspring, but in every other regard, 70-hour power reserve, COSC chronometer. It has that free sprung balance for the full balance bridge, very tough stop seconds, quickset date, and the watch is also nicely made externally with this vintage style but modern bezel construction. You can see there are screws in the edge of the bezel. That's captive bezel construction. It just means that the bezel is more resolutely fixed to the case and less likely to be flipped off if you should impact a hard surface. This is the way Zinn, for example, builds its bezels. Very tough and 200 meters water resistant. It's a dive watch, so let's do a lume shot. And we're back with the Super Ocean Heritage 242. An important note about these is that, unlike the original Super Ocean Heritage, there is a luminescent bezel pearl on these models, so you can read the bezel against the minute hand in the dark, and that's pretty important. Now, we enter the realm of high horology with Groupe. We saw some simple watches, some sports watches. Now let's talk complexity and refinement. This is the Groupe Tourbillon 24 secondes, 24-second tourbillon, 43.5 millimeters in white gold, exceptionally scarce, 3-day power reserve, and you have that 25-degree inclined 24-second tourbillon, so named because it makes a circuit every 24 seconds, twice the speed of a standard tourbillon. In combination with its overcoil hairspring, free-sprung regulator, 6-position adjustment, the slope of the tourbillon and the speed of the tourbillon help to revive Abraham Louis Breguet's original goal of a regulator that cancels out the variation effects of gravity on the speed and amplitude of the balance. This is a watch that restores the original purpose of the tourbillon, even as it innovates in the way it displays that tourbillon. You can see the bridge with black polished columns and a black polished upper structure, completely rounded with sharp interior angles at the joint surrounding the pivot jewel. You'll also note not only is that completely black polished, but the carriage, the actual cage of the tourbillon, is both satin and beveled. As you can see, satin on its top, mirrored anglage on the edges of the components that comprise the tourbillon carriage. There is an overcoil hairspring bent by hand, and it's all beating away at 21,600 vibrations per hour. Now, there is a scale for the power reserve. That scale is made of white gold. The scale against which you can read the seconds under the tourbillon, also made of white gold. Hands and indices, white gold. The dial, silver satin. And then on the reverse side, there's a lovely frosted finish on bridges of nickel, copper, and zinc, that Maillot material, also known as German silver when you see it on a longa. So you have that frosted finish, you have extraordinarily large golden chaton into which the jewels are set, pocket watch style. There's graining on the base plate. You can see that there's satin finishing on the individual wheels, but what you might not be able to see is that the spokes in the inner circumference of these wheels are also beveled with sharp interior angles on each inner face. You can see there are large bevels. They are huge, mirrored, gloriously broad, and easy to see even without a loop. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, at least 8 interior angles where 2 bevels meet at an acute angle. And then you have all of the details that Groupe lavishes on its watches, from real rose gold name and number plates to some of the world's biggest fired blue screws. This watch is all about finishing quality, and you can see that if you look at nothing but the tourbillon. It's self-evident. I recently experienced a Philippe Dufour simplicity here at the office, and I can attest from having examined this watch and that one in tandem that Groupe 100 watches a year from 100 employees in La Chaux-de-Fonds, is rivaling the best that Philippe can manage. They're giving the old man a run for his money. I'm not ready to call a winner here, but I'm saying this watch is in that echelon of quality. Now let's talk about something that's complicated, but perhaps as rare in some regards as a Groupe 40. Arnold Schwarzenegger, former action star and governor of California, yes, they're not mutually exclusive. He was once an Audemars Piguet ambassador of the First Order, highly visible during the 90s and 2000s. He's mostly associated with the 48mm offshores in limited edition, but this Arnolds AllStars perpetual calendar chronograph was an early 2000s, circa 2003 special edition. They came in both white gold and rose gold, and the model features the logo of Arnold's After School AllStars, essentially an after-school fitness charity that Arnold ran, and underneath is a Jaeger-LeCoultre base movement with a perpetual calendar chronograph module on the top. The timepiece is 43mm and substantial, but it's nowhere near as large as some of the Arnold-inspired offshores, so you can wear this watch on a normal wrist. As you can see, I could recommend it for a wrist as small as, frankly, about 15 centimeters circumference. It's not huge, and it's a wonderfully charismatic complication with the chronograph and the perpetual calendar, along with a moon phase. There's something to enjoy every day on this watch. The dial guilloche is exceptionally elaborate. As you can see, there's a sort of spiral radiating pattern that emanates from the hands at center. Then you have those leaf-style hands for the hours and minutes, a lovely silver hour track, and a Rayhaut outboard with a tachymeter. But if you look closely, and we'll get a little bit closer here, you can see one of the best details of this dial. It's the fact that the fired blue Roman numerals are applique rather than printed features. They're three-dimensional. You can really see that dial texture here, and you can also appreciate that this watch, which shares many of the characteristics with the Jules Audemars line, is beautifully made, with satin-finished flanks, continuously rounded, polished highlights to contrast, and you can see how the lugs are constructed separate from the case and then welded together and hand-finished to create that sharp joint. This is a watch that is handcrafted inside and out, beautiful, universally attractive, and if you didn't know it was an Arnold watch, you might say this is one of the most appealing Audemars Piguet products of the 2000s. Certainly in terms of style, this automatic perpetual calendar chronograph has held up. It looks as good today as it did back in 2003. So let's talk about a watch from an independent manufacturer that probably doesn't get the accolades it deserves. Resins, of course, designs in Antwerp, Belgium, and builds in Switzerland, and it is one of the most innovative of independents because of the way time is told on the dial of this Resins Type 1 Mr. Porter, a 12-piece titanium 42mm limited edition. You can see that it features a lovely night blue dial with silver races for contrast, and it is a regulator of a most uncommon sort. So you can see right here it is 10 on the nose, so 10 o'clock. The minutes hand is at 60, and then you can see there's this 7-arc, 7-day legend that corresponds to the 2 days of the weekend hollowed out in blue. So you can see I'm in the first half of the first blue arc, which means I'm looking at 10 a.m. because this moves in clockwise direction. I'm looking at 10 a.m. on a Saturday. There's a 90-second runner, which is an unconventional seconds display, and then inside it is an ETA 28242. You can wind it with the case back, though you don't have to because it is automatic, but you'll also note that you set it with the case back because there is no crown. It's easy to do, it moves quickly, and you can set it bidirectionally, so it works in either direction, but it is one of the most innovative time displays you'll encounter, as the ROCS, the Resins Orbital Convex System, is a movement on top of a movement, and that's where the added value of this watch comes from. It is over 100 parts with 15 jewels in its own right, and it is physically grafted to the 2824, so that half of this is a Tank Tough ETA base movement, and half is original watchmaking by Resins. 42 millimeters in titanium, and effectively, it's 42 millimeters round because the lugs are almost like a wire lug Rodimir. It wears easily and comfortably. It's a handsome, tough, reliable watch that becomes quite intuitive to read. And again, right here you can see it is 1224. It's an easy watch to read at a glance, especially once you get used to it. It also has one of the best loom shots you'll ever encounter. So let's see the loom shot. Did I promise you loom, or did I promise you loom? This is as good as it gets from the folks at Resins. As you can see, the dial is a real event at night, and it's just as much fun to play with the dial at night as it is to play with the dial by day. Again, bidirectional, Resins Orbital Convex System, a planetary display with regulator action. Do you like the Belle & Ross BR05? How about with the slick, open-worked, blue sapphire capped dial? That's what we've got right here. 40 millimeters in stainless steel, 42-hour automatic winding power reserve, 100 meters water resistant, and again at 40 millimeters, this is probably the most wearable of the Nautilus-inspired watches that came out in the last 2 years. I have to say that while I like the original BR05, for me, it didn't change enough. It was an instrument watch dial on a Nautilus-inspired case. Here, the watch starts to come into its own with a little bit more character and a willingness to differ, to diverge with the previous instrument-inspired, cockpit-born look of Belle & Ross tool watches. There have been enough of those since the original instrument watch arrived in 2005, and I have to say, the BR01 and 03, as much as I like them, they shouldn't cannibalize the entire catalog, which is why I like that the BR05, it looks like its own thing. It has a more distinct aesthetic with this blue sapphire dial, and I absolutely dig it. It's just as easy to read, it's just as well loomed, it's just as water resistant, and the case and bracelet are still made by GNF Chatelain, another Chanel company like Belle & Ross, considered to be the best in the business at crafting bracelets, clasps, and cases. And you can really see that despite the fact that this is an affordable watch, the finishing of the case and the bracelet is quite attractive, and the quality is unexpected. As you can see with the bracelet, the removable links are fixed in place by screws. Most watches in this price range are going to use pin sleeves rather than screws. That's truly impressive. You can see automatic winding, and it is a limited edition, the timepiece extraordinarily handsome, and in my opinion, one of the best by Belle & Ross. As much as we love the instrument series, it is good to try things that are new. Not only is this new, but it is incredibly compelling. Let's do a loom shot. I promised you, no loss of fidelity in spite of the unconventional dial. A limited edition of 500 pieces and truly impressive. Lights on or lights out. This is the best kind of vintage watch. The IWC by Porsche Design Compass ER, reference 3510. It came out in late 1978, blackened aluminum, and here's why. This watch, designed with profound anti-magnetic refinements, was built with a magnet right in the case. A compass for adventurers, a signaling mirror, or for the vain, perhaps a little bit of opportunity for narcissism. The watch is only 39 millimeters and extraordinarily compact, also extraordinarily intact. This is a collectible vintage piece, and we've actually got the bracelet right here. In case you're wondering about the bracelet, we have the bracelet from IWC. So the watch can be worn either way. Original tritium dial, it goes without saying. The movement is the IWC 375 which was based on the ETA 2892, but again, modifications were made to the movement to better cope with magnetism on board the watch. It's still a remarkably readable timepiece, Porsche design excelling, creating a design that looks anything but 1980s. If you imagine the watches of the 80s, the Cartier Panthère, the Pasha, the Ebel 1911 and 1911 chronograph, the Reverso 2, if you remember the Reverso 2, those are not memorable for good reasons. This, on the other hand, is. It looks the business. It's gorgeous. It was innovative, ahead of its time, and it's memorable for that reason. International Watch Co. Schaffhausen and Porsche Design both blazing on the dial. Remember, back in 1978, they signed a 20-year partnership to jointly develop watches. This is no mean co-branding. Porsche Design was deeply involved in the process, just as IWC coordinated the engineering with the design team. It was a synergy. It worked both ways. And the 20 years during which these two combined for some of the best sports watches in memory was a golden age for sports watch design generally. This is an extraordinary opportunity. I love the way it looks, the color, the character, the reasonable size, the invention, the engineering, even the crosshair dial. This is a timepiece above and beyond the normal vintage options. You will not always find one of these on the market in this condition. We are not going to apply the Rolex rules. Sometimes you encounter something rare. This is rare. Vacheron Constantin, overseas chronograph. This one known as the Deep Stream, 42 millimeters in steel. It's got a titanium bezel. This is a timepiece that's well regarded as among the best of the overseas Generation 2, which ran from 2004 to 2015. In the late 2000s, Vacheron developed a watch that combined the two metals, steel and titanium, with an internal development nicknamed Deep Stream, and that's where that expression, that term comes from for this watch. It has a Frédéric Piguet movement inside the case, so it's an 1185 40-hour power reserve vertical clutch column wheel integrated with a Vacheron double date module added on top. We're going to do a lume shot for this watch too because it's exemplary. 150 meters water resistant, 25,000 ampere per meter anti-magnetic because of a soft iron inner cage. It features the image of the Italian Navy training vessel Amerigo Vespucci on its caseback, and as you can see, it is beautifully finished in a fashion that's competitive with the best from Audemars Piguet and Patek Philippe. You can also see that there is multiple finish on the reverse side as we have a frosting underneath the ship, which is raised, relieved, and polished along with the waves. Then you have a radial satin grain on the ring that surrounds the ship, and then a satin circular grain, concentric, outboard. This is a remarkably wearable watch that effectively wears with a cushion case profile and lugs that bend around the edge of your wrist. So I'll pop this open, we'll throw it on my wrist to get a sense of how it fits. Maybe we'll zoom out a little bit. And now I pull it so you can see what it will look like if it were sized down on my wrist. It's very comfortable. It's also very flat. You can easily imagine it fitting underneath a cuff. There are many rubber straps available from Vacheron in the aftermarket for this watch. So if you want to avail yourself of the 150-meter water resistance, rest assured you've got no shortage of options. You'll also appreciate that the lug profile arcs around the wrist, and in a sign of its intent to develop a credible sports watch, Vacheron fixed the strap to the case using bars and screws rather than conventional spring bars. That is a refinement I appreciate on a large, heavy, and expensive high-style watch. Okay, neither large nor heavy. Here we have the Nomos Metro in steel, 35 millimeters, with a lovely champagne dial. You can see that the hands are semi-syringe, batons with baton extensions, and then there are a few well-chosen shocks of signal orange. The details here matter, right down to these lovely wire loop style lugs. Again, a wire lug Rodimir comes to mind, but whereas that's a fairly brutal sports style watch, this one exudes elegance. Nomos is nothing if not innovative. Minimalism is the message from the folks in Glashütte, and the watch has no shortage of nuances, but there's nothing extravagant or overwrought about the basic shapes, the lugs, the bezel, the hands, the case, the crown. Turn it over. 43-hour power reserve caliber Deutsche Uhrenwerke 3001. So when you see DUW as opposed to a Greek letter name such as Sigma, DUW means the movement is not just a manufacturer movement, but it uses Nomos' combination of escapement, hairspring, and balance. They call it the swing system. Effectively, it's just a Swiss lever, but what's interesting is that Nomos makes this itself. That is deeply impressive and uncommon. The screws are fired blue. There are lovely Glashütte stripes across the bridge. There's a full balance bridge to brace against shock. And then you can see they use an Edicron regulation system, so the potential potential to regulate this very precisely and to be exacting with that regulation. It exists when you have this system, as it's one of the best regulating mechanisms available, both for timing and for beat error. 43-hour power reserve, automatic winding, gorgeous with a lovely, almost plexiglass-inspired bubbled sapphire. It's a watch that also wears well on smaller wrists. As you can see, my wrist is not huge. I wear this well. I could say you could wear this on a wrist as small as 13 centimeters circumference. So it's a wonderful unisex option, or if you are a lady collector looking for something that's not quite as big, this is a great option. It is the model of discretion and Teutonic reservation. Now here's a watch that has, well, I can't say one leg in each of two worlds, because we're really talking about three worlds here. The world of Hermes Paris, we're talking about Swiss manufacture, we're talking about Hodinkee, all in this slim Demes 100-piece limited edition that came out in 2018. 39.5 millimeters in diameter by 7.8 millimeters thick. It lives up to its name, Slim Demes. There's also a gradient fade galvanizing process that's used on this watch. A limited edition of 100 pieces created for the American watch blog Hodinkee. It is gorgeous with a custom typeface that is radially arrayed outboard. Let me see if I can find my polishing cloth to remove some of these offending smudges. All right, there we go. So you can see that it has a lovely frosted texture, and there's a little bit of a pebbly, rusticated look to the hour track. The center is a lovely metallic blue, and you can see there's a gradient fade to the hour track itself. The hands are minimalist and baton, floating over a handsome sort of rippled silver satin sub-register with a crosshair style index, and it is truly special. When you turn it over, you can see the movement, although labeled H1950. It's based on the Vacheron 5401, 42-hour automatic winding, hacking, and free sprung. It is a sophisticated movement built by Vacheron manufacture, one of the Parmigiani companies, the one that makes the movements, a company in which Hermes has been a stakeholder since 2006. So in many regards, this is a partially in-house movement. Now you can see it is nicely made, and by nicely made, I mean even in detail. It's not just the Hermes motif across the bridges. If you look here, the bezels are surprisingly broad, bright, and not obviously machined. You can also see that the screw heads are nicely black polished. This is not just a thoughtfully designed movement. The details themselves, especially the flourishes of the bevel, truly impressive. With a micro rotor, it's able to be less than 8 millimeters thick and thus very flat, flush, and comfortable on the wrist. It is not a huge watch, but at 39.5, it's a good option for a broad range of tastes. It doesn't feel excessively petite like a true vintage watch might, but nor is it excessively thick or broad. I can wear it well, and I'd even recommend it for a wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference. This is in stainless steel, 39.5 millimeters, the Slim Demes Hodinkee Limited Edition. Let's talk about independent horology, and let's start with Schaffhausen. H. Moser Cie of Schaffhausen makes 1,500 watches a year, and whereas that was sort of trivia in the past, today it's almost becoming a commonplace among collectors to cite that figure. As Moser's actual profile grows ever larger, people are beginning to realize that there's not much difference between F.P. Journe's 950 pieces and Moser's 1,500. I would go so far as to say Moser is in the running to become the German-Swiss F.P. Journe, driven by a dynamic CEO and building watches that just make sense. The company has a refreshing lack of pretense. The products like this Endeavor Dual Time are spectacular. You can see this concept dial, funky blue with a fume fade from blue at the center to black at the edge. This is a signature design element of Moser. They like to be minimalist, and while they have the purity dial with only indices, the concept dial, featuring essentially nothing but the hands, is their most refined, minimal, and poetic effort. This is a timepiece that is, of course, titanium and black DLC, 40.8 millimeters, but it disappears around its dial, which is the star of the show. The timepiece is surprisingly easy to read with black hands on the blue base, and it fits well thanks to the sharply downturned and relatively short-cropped lugs. The watch has a caliber 345 inside that's built by Moser, automatic winding with a 3-day power reserve, and the elegance of a second time zone that you can hide when you don't need it. Just like that, you can clean up the dial. Turning it all over, you can see that the movement is handsome. There are quite a few unexpected refinements here. First, you can see that the Balance bridge is full, anchored on both sides, so it's not a balance cock, it's free sprung, so the full bridge and the free sprung balance making for shock resistance. There's a 14-karat gold escapement for increased power reserve and reduced parasitic losses. There's a handmade Straumann alloy overcoil hairspring that's actually built by Moser. They make their hairsprings, balances, and escapements through their subsidiary Precision Engineering. The movement, automatic winding with bidirectional action. It uses a pawl system that's much like the magic lever, so it's a very tough and efficient 3-day automatic. As you can see, nicely built, properly sized. This movement was designed to go into a case of this size, so it doesn't look outsized or oversized. It feels like a good match between the two. Now you'll note that the bridges have this lovely double-crested Côte de Genève that's distinctive of Moser finish, but you'll also notice that it's adjusted in 6 positions, which is one more than the chronometer standard and the high horology norm. It gives deviation no position in which to hide, whereas most brands will try to hide all of the error in either a crown up or a crown down position. Moser gives inaccuracy no place to take cover. Now let's take a look at Laurent Ferrier of Geneva. I spoke earlier about Philippe Dufour and also of Groupe Forcy. I would throw Romain Gaultier and Laurent Ferrier into that discussion of best fine finishing brands. An independent founded by the namesake watchmaker Laurent Ferrier, who built his career at Patek Philippe and also the racetracks of Europe, as he's a race car driver. This is the Gallet Traveler, 41 millimeters in white gold. It has a travel time function that allows you to index the hand at center, which is your local time, and then there's a 24-hour second time zone at 9 o'clock. There's a date over at 3 o'clock, and you can see as I adjust the time, the 24-hour scroll rolls past the index at 9 o'clock. So you have 2 separate time zones, lovely assegai or spear-style white gold hands, white gold indices, and a cloisonné enamel dial. So little metal wires, or cloisons, that create these cordons and shapes, and then different colors of enamel and different weights of enamel create the darkness and the color contrasts. It has to be fired several times throughout, and it's built on a white gold dial base. So this is an artisanal craft that often results in a high rejection rate, which is why enamel adds considerably to the cost of watches associated with this art. Caliber LF230 on the reverse side, micro rotor with a jeweled staff and a pawl-based winding system. It is absolutely silent. There's a double direct impulse escapement, so there's no Swiss lever here. What there is a set of nickel phosphorus escape wheels that directly impulse the balance only in its direction of travel. This improves power reserve, so you have 1 barrel but a 3-day power reserve, and it improves precision. Like the Moser, adjusted in 6 positions, that's premium. The beveling is beautiful and gorgeous. The black polishing, you'll see it on the screw heads, the bridge for the rotor. You'll see it on top of the balance, the stud holder, as well as the balance cock. Note 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 interior angles at least. They're not shying away. There are Geneva hallmark movements that don't have 1 interior angle where 2 sharp bevels meet. The Côte de Genève are broad, bright, and luminous, second only to Philippe Dufour in weight, width, and detail. The graining is incredibly dramatic. There's engine turning on the base plate. The satination of the wheels is first class, and you can see the rotor has been cut with a rose lathe. As good as it gets, it's free-sprung, 6-position adjusted, uses an overcoil and the double direct impulse escapement. It is technically as interesting as it is aesthetically poetic. Throwing it on the wrist, you can see it's a big watch for a dress watch, but it's not a huge watch at 41 millimeters. Colorful, creative, crafty, memorable, and rare. This is Laurent Ferrier Gallet Traveler Cloisonné enamel, and you can see the image of the North and South Atlantic. Jaeger-LeCoultre, and in 2007, they launched this, the Grande Maison of the Vallée de Joux, the watchmaker's watchmaker, and the Duomet a chronograph, a timepiece, 42 millimeters in yellow gold, launched for 2007 in a 300-piece limited edition. Having owned the white gold model, I believe that the yellow gold model is, by a very close margin, the second most desirable version of this watch. Forget the open dials, forget the quantième lunaire, forget the other complications like the UTT, forget the rose gold, forget the platinum. The yellow gold chronograph, because of this eggshell off-white dial, the blue accents, and the yellow gold on a frosted base, it is the second, by a very narrow margin, most beautiful Duomet to my much-loved white gold black dial. And you could see why. You could see it's a chronograph. At the same time, with coaxial seconds for chronograph and seconds for time, a mono pusher with a 1/6 of a second foudroyant, all displayed on the same dial, 2 movements in one case, 2 power sources, 2 mainspring barrels, both with a 50-hour power reserve. Resetting it is a fun piece of theater. There's a mono counter with the minutes and the hours and a single-digit scrolling minutes disc, 2 power reserve indicators, 1 for time, 1 for the chronograph. You can see the coaxial constant seconds and chronograph running seconds, and you can read down to 1/6 of a second thanks to the foudroyant. Reset, reverse. Caliber 380, 2 mainspring barrels, 2 drivetrains, 1 regulator. It turns one on, shuts the other off, regulating like a traffic cop. 1 starts, 1 stops, alternating at 21,600 vibrations per hour. Column wheel chronograph, German silver style bridges with nickel copper zinc, the copper giving it that golden hue. There's Côte de Soleil, or sunburst waves, radiating out from the imaginary center point atop the balance, which is free sprung. So you can see these waves splashing across the bridges. You have both blued screws and polished screws, with polished screws used to adjust the mechanism, blued screws used to fix the components in place. This is as good as JLC finish gets below $100,000. It is technically proficient and one of the most innovative watches of the 2000s. You can see that the anglage is mirrored, broad, easy to see even without a loop, and that is not the case on most JLC watches. The standard of finish for the Duomet is and has always been higher. An extraordinary watch of real historical milestone status with a full deployant clasp. JLC would later somewhat depreciate the watch by including pin buckles on the Duomet models. Not in 2007. This was the launch model, the original limited edition, the first one to leave the factory, and in my mind, it is a first and a favorite in some ways. Though I love my white gold, I cannot deny that the color and charm of this more vintage accented yellow gold model competes for my affections. I entered this discussion saying it was my second favorite. Right now, I'm feeling kind of conflicted. It's a tie. That said, these days, my opinions trend towards independent brands, and none is more revered, at least in my mind, than De Bethune of Lauberson, Switzerland. Launched in 2011, this is the DB28 Tourbillon. It is 43 millimeters in grade 5 polished titanium with variable geometry, spring-loaded, floating lugs. The timepiece features a 5-day manual wind power reserve courtesy of a patented twin mainspring barrel arrangement, a tourbillon that includes silicon white gold and titanium. The whole tourbillon carriage measures 0.18 grams. It is a 30-second tourbillon, making 2 circuits for every one of a standard tourbillon. It beats sway at an El Primero like 36,000 vibrations per hour, and as you can see, it uses both a proprietary silicon escape wheel for improved power reserve and reduced friction. It uses a silicon wheel and then outboard a white gold rim with the remainder of the structure in titanium. The balance is patented. The twin barrels are patented. You can see that the hairspring, composed of 2 components clamped together in order to achieve the same concentric beating of an overcoil without the shock susceptibility or thickness. That hairspring is patented. And the watch features a stealthy case-back power reserve indicator for the 5 days of reserve de manche. Back in 2011, De Bethune built 29 of these watches. Exclusivity is guaranteed. It is immaculately hand-finished in the traditional fashion. In spite of the avant-garde appearance, you can see the mirrored anglage on the edge of the barrel bridge, the black polish on the top, the black polished titanium globes serving as the hour indices. And if you look closely, you can see Côte de Bethune underneath the barrel bridge at the base of the dial, with all screws black polished. And when you turn it over, you could see this was number 10. Less than 12 millimeters thick. The watch is only 11.2 millimeters thick. It is an ultra-thin and ultra avant-garde, as good as it gets from a company that only makes 150 watches a year, a company that is on the rise, a company that is deeply important to me because I know the people who run it. They're all stand-up folks, and thus this is not merely a matter of personal preference. It is truly personal. I love this brand. De Bethune DB28 Tourbillon, as good as it gets. Email tmosso@thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details. Time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.